Meghan still has not established an identity of her own.
Meghan Markle has come under fire. Prince Philip, he allegedly gave Prince Harry a warning about getting married to Meghan Markle.
The man who sued the British press into silence has not sent a single legal letter to the two people making the most explosive claims of his life. Tom Bower named names. Lady Campbell named dates. Harry named nobody in court. A prince who fears no courtroom suddenly has nothing to say when the subject is his own children. A prince who has sued tabloids, taken broadcasters to court, and pursued legal action across 2 continents suddenly goes quiet. Not privately quiet. Publicly, conspicuously, thunderously quiet. And the silence lands harder than any statement his team could have issued. Because the claims being made are not coming from anonymous corners of the internet. They are coming from people with names, reputations, and decades of documented accountability behind every word they speak. Tom Bower, whose biography of Meghan Markle became a Sunday Times bestseller almost overnight, and Lady Colin Campbell, whose public commentary reaches millions of viewers across platforms on both sides of the Atlantic, have both placed their names alongside a set of claims that touch the most personal dimension of Harry and Meghan's public life. And Harry, a man who has never been shy about reaching for legal remedies when he feels wronged, has not moved against either of them. That gap between the fury reportedly erupting behind closed doors and the legal stillness that continues in public courts is not a small detail. It is the center of gravity around which this entire story turns. To understand why this moment feels different from the long-running background noise of royal commentary, you have to understand who these two people actually are and why the weight they carry in this conversation is not equivalent to ordinary social media speculation. Tom Bower did not arrive at royal biography through celebrity gossip. He built his career over decades as one of Britain's most demanding investigative biographers, working through subjects that included media moguls, politicians, and business figures who had every reason and resource to push back against his conclusions. His method has always been to go directly to the people who were present during the events he is documenting. He builds his accounts from the inside, sourcing them through direct conversations with individuals who were in the room when things happened, and then letting that sourcing carry the argument. He does not write from the outside, looking in. He does not rely on inference where evidence is available. When his book on Meghan, titled Betrayal, was published in March 2026, it went straight to #1 on the Sunday Times bestseller list within days of its release. That does not happen through marketing campaigns alone. That happens when a book addresses something a substantial reading public has been waiting for someone credible and accountable to address in print, with their name attached to every page. Lady Colin Campbell operates differently, but carries her own distinct form of authority in this space. She has spent years building detailed, sustained arguments across television appearances and online platforms that consistently attract audiences running into the millions. She is not an anonymous voice posting theories into the void. She attaches her name, her title, and her claims to public spaces where she can be directly challenged, questioned, and held personally and professionally responsible for what she has said. When she makes an argument, she owns it entirely in a way that carries genuine consequences if she turns out to be wrong. That accountability separates what she does from the ordinary noise of royal gossip that fills the comment sections of every major platform. Between these two figures, across a best-selling book and years of documented public commentary reaching millions of viewers, a body of claims has assembled itself around Harry and Meghan's children that goes well beyond palace intrigue and interpersonal drama. It touches documentation, timelines, medical plausibility, and constitutional law. And understanding exactly what those claims are is the only way to understand why the reported eruption inside Harry's world has been so immediate, so intense, and so telling in what is not produced. Betrayal is nearly 500 pages long, and it moves through an enormous amount of territory. There are accounts of confrontations inside Kensington Palace, including an alleged meeting where Meghan reportedly told Prince William to remove his finger from her face while Harry stood by without intervening. That moment became one of the most discussed passages in the book and generated weeks of debate about its accuracy and its implications for the relationship between the two households. The book examines the financial architecture of the Archewell Foundation, the couple's nonprofit organization, raising questions about how money moved through the structure and whether the governance arrangements reflected what donors and the public have been led to understand. Meghan's Netflix partnership is discussed at length, with Bauer suggesting the platform's actual support for her projects was considerably weaker than the surface impression of the partnership implied. These are significant claims on their own, and they drove substantial conversation when the book first appeared. But the claims that generated the sharpest reaction, the ones that reportedly produced the eruption Harry Circle has described, are the ones touching the births of Archie and Lilibet. These are the passages that caused a new audience, people who had not been closely following the royal commentary space, to suddenly look up the book and start reading. And when they read, the questions Bauer and Lady Campbell had assembled were the ones that stopped them cold. The public account of Archie's birth has existed in an uncomfortable space since it was first offered to the world. Lady Colin Campbell was among the first commentators with serious platform to frame the core tension in specific, nameable terms. Here is what the record shows. After Archie was born, Harry and Meghan sat down with CBS News for their first major interview about his arrival. During that conversation, Meghan stated that she had never originally intended to give birth in a hospital. Her plan, she explained, had been a home birth. That statement was offered as casual contextual background for how events ultimately unfolded, but it sat in direct and unresolved contradiction with the account that had already been widely reported and accepted as the official version of events. The story placing the birth at the Portland Hospital in London. When commentators placed these two accounts side by side, the gap between them was not subtle. Either the home birth intention was accurate, and the Portland Hospital account required significant qualification that was never provided, or the CBS interview contained a statement that did not reflect what had actually happened. Both versions cannot be simultaneously complete without an explanation that has never publicly materialized. Bauer pressed further in betrayal, raising questions about whether May 6 represents the accurate birth date and whether the sequence of events the public was given actually aligns with what the documentary record shows. These are not rhetorical gestures or insinuations designed to be unfalsifiable. They are specific requests for the kind of basic factual clarity that should, under normal circumstances, be straightforward to provide. Then there is a moment that most people miss entirely in real time, but which circulated with considerable force once royal observers flagged it. At Harry's first public appearance with Archie, at a point when the baby was officially just 2 days old, Harry made a comment about how extraordinary it was to watch how much babies change in 2 weeks. Not 2 days. 2 weeks. The discrepancy moved past quickly. Harry was standing in front of cameras with a newborn, clearly emotional, and it would be entirely understandable under those circumstances to say something imprecise or poorly worded. Supporters of the couple make exactly this argument, and it deserves to be acknowledged as a reasonable explanation because intellectual honesty in this conversation requires presenting the strongest version of every counterposition before analyzing it. But Lady Colin Campbell's position is that this moment did not exist in isolation. It existed within a pattern that also included the CBS interview contradiction, the questions about the timeline that Bauer documented, and the way the surrounding narrative seemed to adjust itself depending on the platform and the audience it was being presented to. Each individual element carries a plausible, innocent explanation. Together, they form a picture that Lady Campbell has argued cannot be adequately dismissed as coincidence or casual error accumulated across unrelated moments. What emerged around the birth of Lilibet involved official documents, and that shifted the nature of the conversation considerably. The surface account of Lilibet's arrival is clean and simple. June 2021, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, a healthy baby girl. That version went out to the world, and for most of the public, it remained a complete story. But Lady Campbell and Bauer both examined the surrounding details and found elements that did not sit together as smoothly as the headline suggested. The detail that generated the most immediate discussion was reported accounts that Meghan had made a food stop during active labor on the way to the hospital. On its own, this might sound like an unusual but not impossible anecdote, the kind of story that gets retold with affectionate humor in later years. Lady Campbell's response to it was direct and grounded in medical terms. Active labor is not a mild or easily managed experience. It is physically intense. It progresses quickly, and the window between manageable discomfort and urgent necessity can close faster than those who have not experienced it fully appreciate. The detail Lady Campbell argued plainly, did not match any reasonable medical understanding of what active labor at that stage actually involves physically and physiologically. Then came the announcement gap. After Lilibet was reportedly born, the public was not informed for 48 hours. In the context of a family whose births are announced with considerable speed, where dedicated communications professionals exist precisely to manage this kind of public information, a 2-day gap is not routine procedure. Lady Campbell addressed this directly in public commentary, reaching millions of viewers, raising the possibility that the delay existed because the baby had not yet arrived in conventional sense at the time the gap began. That implication was made clearly, publicly, and on the record. It was never directly answered by the couple's representatives. The birth certificate itself introduced complications that drew significant attention across the royal commentary landscape. Lady Campbell flagged publicly that a state area code associated with Colorado appeared on documentation for a birth officially recorded as having taken place in California. California and Colorado carry different identifying codes, and the distinction between them is not a minor administrative variation or clerical detail that could easily be attributed to routine processing error. If the reading Lady Campbell described is accurate, it raises an immediate and direct question about where the birth actually took place and under what circumstances the documentation was filed. This detail spread quickly through commentary platforms, was debated extensively across multiple audiences, and has never been publicly addressed with a clear, documented correction from the couple's team. Finally, the medical professional publicly associated with Lilibet's birth closed her practice at the end of that same month, June 2021. Without any public explanation and without any public statement about her decision. She ceased practicing and stepped entirely out of public engagement on the subject. Lady Campbell described this as deeply notable. Bauer included it in his broader examination of the surrounding circumstances and betrayal. Neither commentator went beyond what the documented facts showed. Both made clear they viewed it as a data point that deserved serious consideration and serious answers rather than continued silence. Beyond documents and timelines, a separate but parallel thread of this conversation is built around what millions of people watched on their screens during both pregnancies, in real time, as events were unfolding. Lady Colin Campbell used a specific word when describing Meghan's physical presentation during the Archie pregnancy. She called it performed. That word landed with immediate force and divided audiences sharply. Supporters of the couple described the characterization as cruel and entirely without basis, the kind of commentary no woman should be subjected to regarding her body or her experience of pregnancy. Critics pointed out that Lady Campbell was describing something documented in widely available photographs and video footage that anyone with internet access could examine independently. The core observation was that Meghan's physical presentation appeared noticeably different from one public appearance to the next in ways that seemed to go beyond what natural week-to-week pregnancy progression would typically produce in a body carrying a child through its final trimester. Before going any further, the counter-argument here needs to be stated fully and honestly because responsible engagement with this subject demands it. Pregnancies vary enormously between women. Factors including clothing, posture, camera angle, the stage of the day, the level of physical activity, and the individual physiology of the woman carrying the child can all produce dramatic differences in appearance across photographs taken even days apart. Drawing firm conclusions from selected photographs is not the same as producing evidence. It is inference, and inference from visual observation carries significant limitations that anyone engaging with this topic honestly has to acknowledge. Lady Campbell has acknowledged those limitations explicitly. Her response, however, is that she did not rely solely on personal visual observation. She has stated publicly that she consulted with medical professionals, nurses, and women with direct pregnancy experience before speaking on the subject publicly. She described those conversations as producing consistent observations that the visual details being examined raise legitimate questions that natural variation alone could not fully account for across the entire documented sequence. The image that cut most sharply through all of this was a dog shelter visit. At a point when Meghan was reportedly approximately 8 months pregnant, she visited an animal shelter, was photographed in high heels, crouched down to the floor to interact with animals, and rose again without any visible physical assistance. Those images moved through online communities immediately and divided people in exactly the way everything else in this story divides people. Critics argue that this combination of footwear, posture, and unassisted movement would be physically extremely challenging for most women at that stage of a late pregnancy. Supporters argued that every pregnancy is different and that drawing conclusions from a photograph is inherently limited in ways that make confident assertions irresponsible. Both positions are honest responses to an image that cannot by itself settle anything definitively. What Lady Campbell added to this thread was an observation that stands on its own ground entirely. Not one medical professional has publicly confirmed their involvement in either birth, not for Archie and not for Lilibet. Placed against every comparable royal birth in recent memory, including those of Diana's children, the births of Beatrice and Eugenie and Catherine's 3 children, where hospitals were confirmed, medical professionals were named, and the public record was complete and straightforwardly accessible, that absence stands in sharp and difficult-to-explain relief. When Harry and Meghan announced they were naming their daughter Lilibet Diana, the initial media response across the United Kingdom and the United States was almost uniformly warm. A grieving son honoring the Queen and his mother simultaneously, choosing the most personal of all possible tributes at a moment when his relationship with the palace was already deeply fractured. The story wrote itself, and most outlets ran with it immediately without looking further. Lady Campbell looked further. Her account of the actual reaction inside the palace was the direct opposite of the warm headlines. She described cold fury, deep consternation, and a sense of violation among those closest to the Queen. Not quiet gratitude, not private warmth, but a reaction that was the emotional inverse of what was being reported publicly to audiences around the world. The reason, Lady Campbell explained, was a specific and deeply private character of what that name actually represented. Lilibet was not a public nickname. It was not something the Queen had used in any official capacity or shared broadly with the world during her long reign. It was intensely personal, originating in her early childhood from her own inability to pronounce Elizabeth, and used across decades almost exclusively by Prince Philip. It was a name he called her throughout a marriage that spanned over 70 years. When Philip died in April 2021, that name became something more charged than it had ever been before. A piece of a relationship that was gone, the most private remaining connection to the person who had known her longest and loved her most. Using it for a public announcement about a new baby required something from the people choosing it. It required an acknowledgement of what it meant, who it belonged to, and whether permission for its use had ever been sought or granted. Whether that conversation actually happened has been disputed publicly by different sources with different levels of proximity to the people involved. Then came the commercial dimension, which transformed the discussion from sentiment into something more pointed. Reports emerged of filings connected to the name Lilibet made around the period of the announcement. The timing raised questions that Lady Campbell addressed directly and specifically. If the name was chosen purely as a sentimental tribute from grief and love, the commercial activity running alongside it sat uncomfortably with that framing. Bauer's portrait of the couple throughout betrayal is consistent and sustained. 2 people who make decisions that align with long-term commercial positioning, including decisions that appear on the surface to be personal and emotional in nature. The name in that reading was not separate from the strategy. It was an expression of it. An emotional narrative surrounding it provided the cover under which the commercial activity could proceed. The signal that cut most sharply through all of this did not come from a commentator. It came from the palace itself. When William and Catherine released their public congratulations on Lilibet's birth, they referred to the baby as Lily, not Lilibet, not the announced name in its full form. Lily, in a formal public statement from the Prince and Princess of Wales, where every word is considered, every construction is deliberate, and nothing reaches the public without careful review, the choice to use a diminutive rather than the announced name was not casual editing. Lady Campbell argued that it was a measured signal, a quiet, but unmistakable indication of exactly how the name had been received in the household that was closest to its meaning. The palace was not going to validate the framing Harry and Meghan had placed around it. One word, one deliberate substitution, communicating through official channels what those channels would never say aloud in direct terms. All of this builds toward a legal and constitutional argument that most people have not fully processed, because when they process it, it changes the entire character of this debate. The royal family is not a private institution. It is a constitutional one, operating under legal frameworks that extend across the United Kingdom and every Commonwealth realm that still recognizes a crown. Lady Campbell's argument is that the circumstances surrounding the birth of children connected to the royal line are not personal matters falling within the ordinary scope of privacy rights. They are matters of national governance and constitutional law, and the public holds a legitimate and legally grounded interest in the accuracy of the records surrounding them. That framing transforms what might otherwise appear to be intrusive speculation about a private family into something with an entirely different legal and constitutional character. And from that position, the legal silence becomes the most important element in the entire story. Harry and Meghan have demonstrated clearly and repeatedly that they are willing to use a legal system when they believe they have been wronged. They have taken major newspapers to court. They have pursued privacy cases through extended and expensive proceedings. They have shown beyond any reasonable doubt that litigation is not a path they fear when they feel it is necessary and justified, which makes the complete absence of any legal challenge to either Tom Bower or Lady Colin Campbell over claims that go directly to the parentage and the documented births of their children, one of the most discussed and most significant silences this controversy has produced. Lady Campbell addressed this directly when asked about the possibility of facing legal action over her public statements. She said plainly that she would not mind if they sued, as long as they lost. Her reasoning was immediate and specific. Meghan, she argued, would not want to be cross-examined under oath in a courtroom. Not because she has something to hide in the crude sense, but because a courtroom is a fundamentally different environment from a spokesperson's press statement. It requires documentation. It requires consistency under sustained and skilled direct questioning. It requires a full procedural weight of the legal process, in which describing a claim as conspiracy theory carries no legal standing whatsoever, and only verifiable facts carry any weight at all. The discovery process alone, the formal legal mechanism through which both sides are compelled to produce relevant documentation, would bring into the open exactly the kind of primary records that have never been made publicly available around either birth. No legal challenge has materialized. Neither Bower nor Lady Campbell has faced any action over claims of this magnitude and this personal directness. That silence exists alongside every other silence this story has produced. No named medical professionals. No settled documentary record placed openly before the public. No direct response to specific questions that have moved from online speculation into mainstream commentary watched and discussed by millions. The conversation has not quieted as time has passed. It has grown louder and spread further. Every book that reaches #1 on a major bestseller list, every television appearance that clips and circulates across international platforms, every legal challenge that is discussed and then does not arrive, adds another dimension to a silence that the couple has, for reasons entirely their own, chosen to maintain. There is something worth sitting within the human dimension of all of this, because this story, for all its constitutional and legal framing, is also a story about a family. Whatever the full truth of these circumstances turns out to be, the children at the center of this conversation are real children growing up in a world where questions about the circumstances of their births circulate in public spaces they will one day be able to access. The question of accountability, of what the public has a right to know about a family connected by blood and law to the institutions of the crown, runs directly into the question of what children deserve to be protected from. Those two things are in tension here, and the tension is not comfortable to sit with. What Bower's book and Lady Campbell's sustained public commentary have done is move this conversation from a space where it could be dismissed as unserious to a space where it demands a serious response. A best-selling book from a named, accountable investigative biographer. Years of documented public commentary from a named, accountable commentator with a genuine and verifiable track record. A set of questions attached to official documents, public statements, recorded interviews, and constitutional principle. And a legal system that both parties have shown they know how to use, sitting entirely unused on one side of this argument. The questions themselves are not going to disappear. They are too specifically grounded, too clearly documented, and too consistently placed into the public record by people with too much to lose if they are wrong. The silence that surrounds them is not neutral. It is a choice. And choices of this kind, in this context, around these specific subjects, carry their own weight and their own meaning entirely apart from whatever explanation might eventually emerge. What remains for now is the eruption that has been reported and the stillness that has followed in legal terms. One response tells you that something has landed. The other tells you that what has landed cannot, for whatever reason.